So good morning. I had some very inspiring discussion, and it's truly my pleasure to be here today with you. My name is Grazia, and in the next 30 minutes or so, I will be talking about big data. Yeah, when John asked me to come to this conference and talk about big data, my first reaction was, oh no, big data. And then I told John, can I talk about machine learning? And he said, no, machine learning is already taken by Gero and Mark. They did a great job, right? But actually, many companies and people would share my same reaction when it comes to big data. Companies today, they don't want to talk about big data. Big data is already outdated. They want to quickly jump and explore fancy machine learning and artificial intelligence projects. But then they struggle when they realize that their data warehouse cannot even provide the speed and scale that they need. In fact, the truth is that if you are not ready for analytics, you can forget about any fancy machine learning, artificial intelligence project. I hope I have convinced you that big data is still a very relevant topic. So I work for Google, and at Google, we love numbers because we are a data-driven company. And so in the course of this presentation, I will be sharing some numbers with you. There will be 163 zettabytes of data by 2025. And if you don't know what a zettabyte is, well, it's 1 trillion gigabytes, so lots of data. Those data are coming from interconnected devices and applications. Think of an autonomous car, intelligent personal assistant, or even things that you cannot imagine right now. The connected world will amplify big data. But you don't have to wait until 2025, right? Because every day, the world is generating big data. Big data is all around us. But do we actually make sense of those data to gain meaningful insight for our business? We don't. I have lots of conversation with leaders in analytical teams, leaders of analytical teams, and they all struggle with one challenge, which is having the data in silos. This is typical of many companies. They have great data, but they can't use them effectively because they can't link the data set together. If you don't have data in a central place, you can't get a 360 view from that data. Today, who owns the customer owns the business. And this is true for companies of all sizes, whether you have 100 customers or you have 100 million customers. We live in an age of increased personalization, and so you need to know your customers and what they need. But many companies today don't have this comprehensive view of their customer. And one reason is that dealing with big data is still not easy. There are many challenges around big data. These are just some of them. You need to have the right scaling infrastructure to really being able to manage this huge amount of data. You need to have the right people, finding talents. This is often underestimated. People don't think about that. But this is a huge challenge today. All the companies are in competition to find talent. You need to optimize your cost. And on top of all that, you also need to manage the growing expectation of your business. The business just wants insight and very quickly. And so you need to do something. I'm going to share you some additional number. But let me first say in a provocative way that I believe that cloud is the only answer to the challenges in big data. And I would be very happy to talk to you over lunch and get actually your ideas about my provocative answer to the big data challenges. So do you know that today, 80% of data analysts' time is spent in data preparation? Not in building fancy machine learning model, not in training those models, but just in preparing the underlying data. That's a lot of time, right? And we keep here the business, like in very marketing slogan, talking about reduce time to market. Yeah, but how can we reduce time to market if we have such a big bottleneck here, where 80% of the time is just spent in preparing the data? Accordingly to a Harvard Business Review report, company use today 1% of their unstructured data and less than 50% of their structured data. And on top of that, 90% of enterprises' data are unstructured data. So there is lots of waste here. There are lots of data that we don't use it. But we need to do something about it, because data is the new currency. And how you handle data today is going to determine whether you are going to be a winner or a loser tomorrow. And sometimes I hear from my customer, I don't have data. Well, honestly, I have a hard time to understand this statement. Because today, every company is a data company. And you don't even need to have data. Well, eventually, you need to, right? But the first thing you need to have to get started is to have a data strategy. And data strategy, I like to think in this way, it's always a combination of three things. So number one is the data you have. Number two is the data you can acquire. And number three is what you are going to do with this data, what you are going to create that nobody else has created so far and is going to make a huge impact, a huge difference in your business. So think about those three things when you think about data strategy. And now I want to share with you like 4 examples of companies in different industries that have solved their business challenge with very powerful data strategies. So the first example is a dairy company. Their business is very simple. It's milk and bacteria that make yogurt and cheese. But how much milk is produced in their factory, it's not obvious to them. So the amount of milk is connected to the amount of rain, because the more it rains, the more the cows drink, and the more milk they produce. The amount of milk is also connected to the breed of the cows, because there are cows that are just making more milk, right, by their DNA. And it's also connected to the movement of the cows. So how much the cows move, how much they exercise. And so the dairy company had 30 years of data about how much milk was produced in their factory, which is already lots of data, right? Very precious information. And what they could acquire was the weather forecast data, because that's public data, right? It's available there for you to use it. And they could also start to collect data about the movement of the cows, just putting a geolocation tag on the cows. And now you have all the ingredients for a great recipe, right? They could start to build and train a machine learning model to actually forecast the amount of milk weeks in advance. And that for them was a game changer, because they could anticipate the production. They could anticipate how many people and how many machines they needed. and all the downstream logistics, the transportation, and so on. I mean, I understand milk factories has nothing to do with your business, right? I just want you to get some inspiration, some ideas of out of the box of industry that are different from your industries, but are facing the same challenges today. The second example comes from retail companies. So a famous retailer came to us and said, look, we have lots of data from delivery, purchasing history, loyalty cards, but we don't know what to do with this data. And they were an apparel company, so their business happens in the fitting room. It's there in the fitting room where actually you decide whether to buy or not to buy, right? Because you either finding yourself looking great in some clothes or you don't, right? And they realized that they did not have any data about the fitting room, about what's going on in the fitting room. Now, the first simple thing you can think of is to put some passive chips on every SKU in the store, every item in the store, right? Which will already collect lots of data. Because you can have like a chip reader at the entrance of your fitting room, and you can understand which item comes in, which items comes out, what goes back to the shelves, what is exchanged with another item, and what is finally purchased. This is pretty simple to implement, but it's a bit of an incremental thinking. You just do a little step in addition to your business. But what about thinking 10x? What about if you completely reinvent the fitting room experience? And I just want to make here an extreme example, kind of an hypothetical scenario. Think of put sensors in the fitting room to understand how people look at themselves in a mirror, in front of a mirror. Or having a natural language assistant which recommends you or helps you to find an accessory that fits with what you are trying on, right? Or new colors, for example. And here the possibilities are just endless. I mean, in those cases, the customer realizes that you are getting data from them. But in return, they're getting so much value, so much service. And just to be clear, I'm not here to say that you should put sensors in a fitting room. That was not the point of this story. My point here is that you should think of ways to find the data you need. And in order to do so, you should be creative. You should really think out of the box. Another example, another industry is banking, right? Most of the time, I have a call from my banker who wants to sell me something that I don't want or I don't care at that moment. And just 2 weeks ago, my banker called me and he wanted to sell me some insurance services. And I'm not someone who is going to buy more insurance right now, really. If the banker would have known me a little bit better through my profile, through my background, through my history, he would have known that selling insurance services was a no-go for me. I really don't know, like, for how long bankers can keep calling me or calling you, right, at the right time, at the wrong time, on the wrong topic, wasting our time. I have plenty of this story, like, from friends, really. I'm gonna go back to banking, like, in a few seconds. Just want to tell you, like, this last example of the healthcare industry. We ran a project with a huge healthcare provider to understand the behavior of people affected by diabetes and facing flu epidemics at the same time. So you may know that diabetes is a chronic condition, right? You need to live with that. But flu epidemics is an acute situation that can just happen and spread very quickly. And if you have diabetes and you take statins, having the vaccine for flu can be a problem because it can interfere with your treatment. But in some cases, having the flu can be a bigger problem, right? So it's kind of a difficult situation where you have to decide what is the best of two evils. And so, how do you do that? You can combine personal information with geolocation information to understand whether the area where the patient is at risk for flu epidemics. And you can have a system like telling you, for example, look, you are 70% likely to get the flu. I would recommend you to take the vaccine. And this is what it's called preventive healthcare. It's really enabling a system of anticipation and nudging. And it's going into more and more into personalized medicine. So let's have a closer look at banking. Banks have the saving and spending behavior of all of us. But what do they do with that? Right? I see some faces say they don't do anything. Yeah, they almost do nothing with those information. What about capturing the behavior, the sentiment from the customer interaction? Today, it's becoming more and more unusual to go to the bank and talk to the banker, because most of the conversation, those interactions, happen over the phone, right? And we can understand, or we should understand, from those conversations. So what we could do is to, from those conversations, to take the speech, transforming to a text, and then transforming the text to the sentiment, and understand, or in some cases, even anticipate the customer needs, right? What about the corporate data itself, right? Banks are a data-intensive industry, right? You have high-frequency trading, predictive asset trading, and all those operations, all those things are gonna change tremendously the way that you organize today your back-end operations. And I know that all of that might sound a bit frightening to you, right? Overwhelming, because, oh my gosh, you think I need to implement all those new strategies. At the same time, I need to keep my business running now. So definitely it's not, definitely it's not easy. But it is the only way to survive. Today, if your business is not growing, it's actually dying, given how fast things move. And the reason why you need to act now, it's because the cost of the status quo is huge. So, evolution can have dramatic effects, very negative effects, on rigid companies. If you don't move, you are out of business. And let me take the example of the printing industry. I'm talking about encyclopedia. What happened to that industry? Well, I'm sure you know, right? All the biggest, all the encyclopedia providers, they ran out of business in a couple of years. So Britannica had a $600 million revenue, which simply vanished. And the most amazing part of this story is actually that even the second generation of encyclopedias, the one on CD-ROMs, they also vanish in a couple of years. So traditionally, those industries have been very focused on printing, on the book. But think about that. Britannica was actually never there to publish books. They were there to share human knowledge. And the book was just a tool, was just an instrument, which has been good for a while, has been useful, but was no longer useful, no longer that useful in the 90s. And the same applies to CD-ROMs. They have no longer been useful in the 21st century. Evolution is a fact that we can't stop. But the transformation that actually you would need to make in order for your business to survive is your choice. It's something that is in your hands. Let me go back to some numbers. As I told you that we love numbers, right? So those numbers are, at least for me, mind-blowing. This is the amount of data that Google has to handle every minute. And those data, those numbers, actually put Google in a leading position when it comes to big data at scale. Today, we have 7 cloud products with more than 1 billion users each. And for us, it's a true privilege to build technology for so many people. Big data is in our DNA. We have decades of experience in big data, right? And with that experience, we can really help enterprises in choosing the right technology, adopting the best practices. And it's really our secure infrastructure that helps us to deal with big data at scale. And that's the reason why PayPal has chosen to work with us. I really like this quote. This comes from Doug Cuttin, which is the co-creator of Hadoop, which is a very famous, widely used framework to deal with big data. Doug says, Google is living a few years in the future and sending the rest of us messages. The first time I read this sentence, I was sure that the reason why Google is living in the future is because of its amazing technology. But then I joined Google. I started to work at Google, and I realized that I was wrong. That is not coming from our amazing technology. Because there is something, and Gero has also discussed this point, there is really something that goes beyond the technology, and it's the culture. It's something that companies really forget. But it's what, in the end, is going to make a big impact in your business. You can have the best technology, the most amazing technology in the world, but at the end of the day, you need to have the right culture in your company in place. And so I just want to conclude that data is important. It's probably the key for some business challenges, but it's not the only ingredient that you need. In order to make sense of the data, make use of the data, there are other factors that you need to take in consideration. You need to have the right technology, the right infrastructure to actually use data and get insights in minutes and not in months. You need to ask the right questions, right? Have the right business case. Asking the questions that were not even possible to answer before. And you need to have a new mindset as well. So just in a few words, you need to embrace a data-driven culture. Thank you very much.